Then he came before this. Take another look around before you fall. See where you came from. One oak strong and growing tall creates it all. Leaves all different colors, but made all the same. For the mistakes of the forest, all are to blame. All burn the same. So for the sake of those that came before, don't just fall, but add to embrace and be sure to not destroy. 'Cause this is not the first forest. Many will come after this. Whoa, 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 all the leaves from up above will all fall down. For to continue, they have to sink into the ground. Yeah, all fall down. Some that fall will never see what's underneath, only see the things that keep them in the tree. So selfish. Everything that falls is covered.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jessica Bayless. I oversee the Civic CLP initiative at Carnegie Library of Pittsburgh, and I'd like to welcome you all to tonight's program, The Campaign to Fix Harrisburg, How Unfair Rules Kill Bipartisan Solutions. This program is supported through generous funding from the Pittsburgh Foundation. This program is being recorded and will be shared with all registered attendees. As you listen to the presentation, you are encouraged to share questions in the Zoom Q&A found at the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to address those with the time allotted at the end. And finally, just a couple community agreements we have written for this virtual event. By participating today through Q&A, you are agreeing to the following. Keep it relevant. This discussion is focused on the need to reform the rules in Harrisburg to prevent committee chairs from blocking broadly supported bipartisan solutions. Please do your best to tailor your questions or comments to the topics at hand. Keep it kind, treat everybody in the virtual space with respect, and keep it positive. Opinions will vary, and all opinions are valid. It's now my pleasure to turn things over to our Fair Districts PA speaker, Doug Webster. And I think we got to unmute you, Doug.
Myself, how's that work? Okay.
Perfect.
All right, and let me make sure that I've got my share screen working here. Everything working at your end, folks?
Excellent.
Okay. Well, as I said, I want to thank everyone for being here this evening, and we're going to be talking to you tonight about the idea of fixing Harrisburg. And we're here because the voices of Pennsylvania are not being heard across the political spectrum, and they quite frankly cannot be heard. And worse yet, as we're going to show you, your own legislative representatives are largely incapable of representing you because they're giving away their power to do so. I'm going to start with a story which may be familiar to many of you. Fair District, Pennsylvania's 6-year fight to get the legislature to reform our redistricting process by creating an independent commission to handle the task. Now, during that time, we clearly made our case. 2/3 of Pennsylvania voters in 2 different polls supported redistricting reform, and by a substantial margin. We had enough legislative co-sponsors to pass these reforms if it got a vote. But despite that, leaders refused to take them up for 3 straight 2-year sessions. That's a pretty amazing story of democracy denied, but we're not here to rehash the story of redistricting. What we're going to show you is that our story is just one in a long history of what we call dysfunction by design in Harrisburg. Here's another current example. The strong majority of Pennsylvania's public school boards have signed a petition asking our legislature to consider reforms to the formula used to fund Pennsylvania charter schools. They do so because they've seen more and more of their budget dollars diverted to charter schools under the formula, a 25-year-old formula, and that has happened with no detailed independent analysis of whether charter school educations are better or whether the funding formulas are fair. And for many, particularly those in rural areas with a limited and often older base of taxpayers, that's forced cuts to critical school programs ranging from badly needed counseling to library services and extras like the arts, music, and even sports. Now, I'm going to show you Allegheny County, but I hope we've got some people from other parts of the state. So basically, if you look at the top of the slide, you're going to see a URL that you can use to get at the database that the School Boards Association has put up. And it shows that 39 Allegheny County schools are among those signing the petition. And you can see them here. If you're from another county, another part of the state, you can go to the link I've included, and I'll leave it up here for a minute so you can copy it. And if you want to see what schools in your area have signed on. But I can tell you right now, the chances are very good that wherever you live in Pennsylvania, most of the public school boards in your county have signed their own letters calling for legislative action. In fact, 436 school boards have signed that petition out of 500 boards statewide. That's over 87% of the school boards in Pennsylvania. And you'd think with that kind of support, our legislature and your legislators would listen to their pleas and at least take a look at the formula, evaluate the quality of charter and public education, and make decisions based on those facts. Sadly, the chances the legislature will do anything in response to a request from nearly every board in the state is 0. The frustration of public school boards is not in any way unique. In fact, for decades under both Democrats and Republicans, measures with significant bipartisan support from both legislators and the public have been stonewalled in Harrisburg and our collective voices ignored. And here are just a few examples. Pennsylvania is just one of 8 states in the country with no gift ban for state legislators. Even though this issue has some of the strongest support of any we've researched, leaders have refused to act for decades. Childhood lead exposure is another one that's on the list. And school funding reform and property tax reform. I talked about the gift ban, and a group called March on Harrisburg has been fighting for years now to get this ban passed. And their leader, Rabbi Michael Pollack, at a recent forum explained the problem.
I think I'm here specifically to talk about the gift ban, which is a bill that we've been working on for a few years now. And we run into what everybody else here has run into, the same problem. I'm here to tell the truth today. And the truth is that this is not a democracy. This isn't close to a democracy. In a democracy, the majority rules. In a democracy, 50% plus 1 wins you a vote. But in Harrisburg, where this is not a democracy, And I see all the lobbyists walking by. I'm talking to you guys here. This is not a democracy. 6 gatekeepers manage this building. If 1 out of 253 legislators says no, then the answer is no. We have support in the House. We know we do. Out of the 203 reps, we have a vast majority in support of the gift ban. They would vote for it. We're working on it, but that's where we are. We're stuck. The state's gerrymandered. To even get on the ballot requires money. And to really win in a competitive district requires a lot of money. How do you become the House Majority Leader? You raise enough money to dole out checks to all of your colleagues. If you can't bring in over $1 million, you don't get to be a Majority Leader. And the absurdity, the frustration, is that I was just banned from the House Majority Leader's office. They brought in the whole police force. And I know they're listening. I know they can hear this. There were about a dozen police officers showed up because we were there to ask for a meeting. The nerve. A meeting to get them to call a vote on the gift ban. And while we were sitting there in the lobby, this was one of the most absurd things I've ever experienced in this building. 3 lobbyists walked past us in this building, and they have gifts in a bag. They have a bag filled with gifts, boxes, wrapped, bows on top. It's not supposed to be that literal. And they keep telling us, do it the right way. Why can't you just do it the right way? Which is another way of saying, please go home and shut up. Please allow us to continue to not solve your problems, but to only address the problems of our donors and the lobbyists that they send in to represent them. This place is fundamentally broken.
And it's interesting to note that March on Harrisburg did indeed march from York to Harrisburg over several days last month and arrived in Harrisburg trying to get the legislature to vote on this gift ban bill. And the House members went out the back door of the legislature and refused to take it up, saying that they were upset because of all the demonstrations that made them feel unhappy. And it never got passed. Now, as I said, there's other bipartisan issues: gift bans, legislator ethics and money, childhood-led exposure, school funding reform. For decades, the school funding model has been criticized by experts, school boards, and citizens as inadequate. There's an honest disagreement over the best way to resolve this issue. Legislation to change the model is ignored by leadership. The gridlock's so bad, a diverse array of education and community groups initiated a lawsuit that's cost the state millions of our tax dollars in legal fees. A decision is pending in the case. It will almost certainly be appealed, resulting in more delay and the use of more state tax dollars as the argument continues. Now, also, Pennsylvanians have different views about what constitutes good property tax reform. But the General Assembly has done nothing to change a system that large majorities of citizens view as inequitable. And let me note that Fix Harrisburg doesn't take a stand on any of these issues in terms of what is the best solution. Our goal is to help Pennsylvanians understand that bills with demonstrated bipartisan support deserve to be heard, debated, and voted upon, and not stonewalled. Now, I told you about our efforts to get the bill passed to create an independent citizens commission to handle redistricting in the state. In 2018, after we'd been through a full 2-year session, the day after the session closed, Fair District sponsored a forum in Harrisburg. And one of the speakers was Pennsylvania Representative Steve Samuelson, who's a Democrat. Samuelson, along with a Republican colleague, Representative Eric Rowe of Chester, introduced and was co-sponsor of House Bill 722, the Fair Districts Reform Bill. That was the bill Fair Districts had proposed to create a redistricting panel of citizens rather than legislatures. So on this Saturday, one day after the latest 2-year session had ended with no action on the bill, Representative Samuelson explained just what happened.
As you may know, I was the sponsor of House Bill 722, and we got 110 co-sponsors. That's 55% of the House. One of only 2 bills in the entire session. We had about 2,400 bills, 2,500 bills. Only 2 bills were sponsored by a majority of representatives. So with 55 sponsors, 55%, 110 sponsors, I thought, well, at least we're going to get some discussion. We're going to get some movement. We're going to get some action on this bill. As you may know, it was introduced on May 8th of 2017, and it was stuck in committee for 18 months and 22 days until it also it went away at midnight last night. We have to start again in January. We tried many different avenues to get that bill discussed. We tried to show bipartisan support across the state. We had 38 Republican co-sponsors when we were at our 110 co-sponsor level. We tried to have, we respectfully asked for a hearing. I sent a bipartisan letter to the chair of the committee. He has not answered the letter. It's been over 15 months and he's 14 months and he still has not even answered a letter written by 3 of his colleagues. We tried a discharge resolution. There's a procedure where the House can try to discharge a bill out of committee over the objections of a chairperson. That was stymied twice. The chair of that committee decided to amend the bill and then hold on to it in the committee. So those bills never were released to the full House floor. So we're talking about rules because we think our rules need some amendment.
And I should note here, the representative mentioned a discharge petition, which is getting enough votes to force a bill out to a vote. I will note that we've done intensive research and we haven't found a single instance in modern times in which a discharge petition has ever been successful in the legislature.
As you may know,
now, your representatives, when they come to the legislature, give away their power to represent you. They cede every vestige of their power to the leadership, and they turn themselves into paperweights and rubber stamps with no power to represent you. They cede every vestige for the next 2 years, and they cannot represent you if for any reason the leadership is opposed. Now, this begs the question, if the present rules of the legislature are so bad for our democracy, how on earth do they get adopted in the first place? Well, let Representative Samuelson walk you through just how things work in Harrisburg and how rules are adopted that set the guardrails for each 2-year session.
so we're talking about rules because we think our rules need some amendments. The new legislature gets sworn in on first Tuesday of January. And one of the first things we do traditionally is pass the House rules. And the House rules, when they're passed, govern our legislative business and our committee assignments, our parliamentary procedures for the next 2 years. 2 years ago, we got a 50-page resolution with the House rules. We got about, I'd say 18 hours notice. I think I got this the day before. We get sworn in at noon. This was passed at 2 in the afternoon. So that was resolution number 1. But before they took up number 1, they took up number 2, which passed, which said the House rules cannot be amended. There was 132 representatives who voted not to allow amendments. And then 13 minutes later, they voted for the final package. We know this is the time to talk about rules because it can affect legislation directly.
And notice that sequence. The rules are brought up, they're presented to the legislators less than a day before they're to act on them. There's 60+ pages of legalese, and the very first thing you vote on as a new legislator or an incumbent is a resolution that says you're about to vote on the rules, but you can't amend them. You have to pass the no amendment resolution first, and they do. So they've given away all their power.
So we're talking about.
So the rules really are a problem. They give majority party leaders complete control over what bills are considered, what bills are heard on the committee, what are voted in the chamber, and what bills get sent to the other chamber, and what bills pass. They prevent bipartisan solutions. There are no checks and balances. And again, this isn't just isolated to one party. Republicans have controlled the legislature for most of the past 2 decades, but Democrats too have a rich history of exactly the same practices when they've had control. The result is that one powerful leader or committee chair representing as little as 0.5% of Pennsylvanians can ignore, block, or gut any bill they want to, regardless of how much bipartisan support it has from legislative co-sponsors or the public. Not surprisingly, a 2021 study looking at which states had the most and least effective legislatures found that Pennsylvania ranked 47th in comparison to the most efficient state, Colorado, which passed over 80% of its proposed bills. Now, one reason for Colorado's efficiency and a possibility for our legislature is automatic calendaring, which means that if a bill is introduced, it is guaranteed a hearing and a vote. It obviously would cut way back on the number of bills that are written in Pennsylvania, but never see the light of day. The study of agenda practices in state legislatures done with the National Council of State Legislatures produced this map showing states ranked by the fairness of rules governing their legislative agendas. In states with low scores, majority party leaders have the power to ensure that only their priorities advance through committees and onto the floor. In dark purple states with high scores, rules like automatic calendaring of bills and requirements that committees hear or report all bills means that majority leaders are less able to block legislation and overrule a bipartisan majority. States received 1 point for the presence of each of these rules in the chamber, with the index equal to the percentage of positive points earned. Colorado earned 100% on their fairness for governing the legislative agenda in their state chambers. Pennsylvania, you won't be surprised, was 0. That means there are no policies in place in the Pennsylvania legislature to ensure that bills with bipartisan support will get a vote. A very few partisan gatekeepers can block bills with strong public support, like redistricting reform, or push through partisan bills with no public support, like a proposal to create judicial voting districts. I won't go into that proposal here, but I can provide more information if you want it later. It's an issue that's kind of holding fire right now. I'm going to welcome you to what we call the Waterfall of Dysfunction, that is our legislature's performance session after session, ranking us among the least efficient in America. In the 2019-20 session, almost 4,200 bills were introduced. Just 285 of them were enacted, including budget bills and bills naming roads and bridges. And for the current session, we're on a track for a record that is even worse. So what needs to change? Our Constitution for Pennsylvania states that the people have an inalienable right to alter and reform their government in such manner as they may think proper. But our present system makes that virtually impossible. Pennsylvania has no way to force issues onto the ballot with petition and referendum, as was the case in many other states. Michigan, for example, recently used the petition process to get a proposed independent redistricting commission on the ballot, and it passed with strong voter support. In the last election in Michigan, based on districts drawn by the new commission, were among the smoothest in Michigan history. Pardon me a second. But here in Pennsylvania, overwhelming public and legislative support means nothing if a few leaders are opposed. No change will happen until we reform the rules. We're not saying every bill proposed should be passed. We are saying that bills with bipartisan support deserve votes. We have a right to know where our legislators really stand on legislation that's important to us. We can't know unless they vote on it in committee, on the floor of the House or Senate, and in both chambers. These minor changes, commonly followed in many other states for fairer agenda settings, would go a long way towards fixing Harrisburg. So what can you do to help us fix Harrisburg? First, we're asking each of you to individually visit our website at fixharrisburg.com and sign our petition calling for change. When you do, make note of it in social media and outreach it to your friends and colleagues and encourage them to sign as well. You can also text us or take a picture of our QR code to go directly to our petition sign-up page on the website. Now, we got over 100,000 signatures of support for redistricting reform. We've got several thousand supports for this new campaign to fix Harrisburg. And with your help and support from your friends and neighbors, we can do a similar job to help raise the issue and show the support for change in Harrisburg. Also, you can contact your legislators. We made it easier for you to find out where your candidates stand if they've taken a petition on these questions. Our Fix Harrisburg website and click on the individual tab, and there you'll find links that will take you to our current legislator database and their state house or senate district. Now remember, the maps have changed slightly, so you're may have to look around a little bit to make sure you've got the right district, but you'll be able to see if they established a position where they stand on the issue. Just in broad terms, you may not be surprised to know far more Democrats have responded than Republicans for the most part, have refused to participate. We also have our handy Know Before You Vote tool. We've been asking candidates to tell us where they stand on the support for the rules and an open, transparent redistricting process. So you can choose your district and see if your candidates have taken a stance. And if not, there's information on how you can reach out to them and tell them the issue is important to you and you want to know before you vote for them. We're asking candidates for office this fall to answer these three questions: their position on an independent citizens redistricting commission, their support for legislation to ensure transparency, public input, and clear and enforceable criteria for redistricting, and their position on rules to ensure bills with bipartisan support get votes in committees and on the floor of both chambers. Now, if you're a member of a group that's been fighting for change in Harrisburg, like the School Boards Association, the Drive to End Gifts to Legislators, the campaign to deal with lead in our schools and homes, and encourage them to join the fight to fix the rules. Because we're discovering that over and over, many of these groups have been fighting for years and getting nowhere, but they never realize how the system is rigged against them. And when we start showing them the reasons why this is happening, they say, oh, now I understand. And we've had more and more of them join. And what they're doing is encouraging their members to sign our petition, reach out to their legislators and ask them to support this. So if you are a member of an organization that is fighting for a specific cause or causes, we'd be more than happy to come and talk to you just like this, tell you about our campaign and how you can get involved to help sponsor the push. We're not trying to take over your particular issues. We just want you to see that you're part of a large picture of groups that all are trying to make Pennsylvania a better place and being stonewalled as a result. Because until we all have fair rules, nothing in Harrisburg is going to change. So this is just one of over 1,160 talks we've given across Pennsylvania. And we just topped 46,000 or 45,000 citizens that we've talked to educate them about reforms and about our legislative dysfunction. So again, we're happy to come and talk to you. If you'd like us to come, you can go on to the Fair Districts website, fairdistrictspa.com, and go to events, and you can fill out a form and request a speaker, and we'll set somebody up to come and talk to you either directly or via Zoom. We're seeking out tabling opportunities, fair festivals and fairs and community functions, again, to help spread the word. So letting us know of upcoming events can be a big help, because until we have fair rules, nothing in Harrisburg will change. Now, we know it's easy to get discouraged. We too often meet people who just sigh and say, nobody can fix that place. That's understandable, but it's increasingly dangerous to our democracy because that kind of cynicism and withdrawal from the process creates an even richer climate for a system that's entirely designed to ignore the will of the people and getting stronger in that regard. We encourage you to talk to your friends and neighbors and pass along what you heard tonight. Go and sign our petition, go directly to your legislator or candidates running for the legislature this fall and tell them, we want you to represent us. Don't give away your powers to do that the very first day in Harrisburg, because together we can change things for the better and create a fair and transparent system that works for all of us. So that's the main part of my presentation. I do have a couple of other segments here, which you might be interested in. And Jessica, I'll kind of defer to you here. One takes a look at a recent effort by the legislature to pass a single bill with 5 proposed constitutional amendments in it.
That would be great to hear.
Okay, one of those has to do with abortion, by the way.
Okay.
They're hoping to pass it twice and get it on the May primary ballot where the voters get a chance at it. So let me continue on to this next one here. This bill, SB 106, was passed after 11 p.m. on July 15th. There were no public hearings. It upends the balance of power in Pennsylvania government. It removes safeguards against unrestrained power, and it calls multiple rights into question. For the bill to be implemented, it has to pass again in the next session beginning January 3rd, 2023. And then, as I said, it'll go on the ballot, the May 2023 primary ballot. which is the least turnout of any primary ballot in Pennsylvania. In part because the only things on the ballot that for that cycle are municipal election primaries. The constitutional amendments do not need the governor's signature to be signed. The governor can't veto them if they're approved by the voters, and Pennsylvania voters seldom reject a ballot question. If these amendments make it to the ballot, there's a high likelihood that they would be approved. And one of them, as I say, is abortion rights. It also has to do with voter ID and other measures, which have had virtually no debate, but which leaders want. Pardon me here. I'll have to be frank in saying that I'm battling a very minor dose of COVID. So I'm going to take a quick run through now because the question is often asked, well, we had a redistricting cycle. What happened? You know, I couldn't keep track of all the things that happened. Well, we have a legislative reapportionment commission that draws districts for legislative districts. That's the House and Senate. And the legislature draws the maps for congressional districts. So here's the map that resulted from our last redistricting process. And I'll talk more about its fate. The legislature has a reapportionment commission, a redistricting commission, and 4 members of that commission are automatically named by our Constitution as being the majority and minority leaders of the House and Senate. Now it's their task to pick a chairperson, a 5th person to break ties, and they almost never are able to do that themselves. So what happens is the state Supreme Court steps in, and in this case of this last cycle, they named Mark Nordenberg as the former dean of the Pitt Law School. And under his guidance, a series of hearings were held across the state, seeking input, and in many cases, citizen-drawn maps. The end result was maps that were the most analysts agreed still keep a slight edge for Republicans, but better represent today's electorate statewide and reflect population shifts documented by the latest census. And one of the innovations that Nordenberg brought in was he had his own mapping expert, somebody who'd done a lot of drawing maps before, was familiar with the process and knew how to analyze what had been presented. So that was a big help to him. The end result was the House maps adopted by the commission on a 3-2 vote, with Nordenberg signing with the 2 Democrats on the panel. The Senate districts were adopted 4-1. Senator Ward joined the 2 Democrats and Nordenberg. And as usually happens, legal challenges were filed, 9 of them, in fact. But the Pennsylvania Supreme Court ruled in March that the maps were in compliance with mandates of the Pennsylvania Constitution and the United States Constitution. So now the question is, what happens next with Pennsylvania's redistricting process? The first possibility is that nothing changes in how our legislature and its reapportionment process works. It could happen again. Hang on just a second here. If it happened again and stayed the way it is, it would again rely on the selection of a chair. And if the choice naturally sides with the majority, which has happened in the past, the potential for greater gerrymandering occurs. Also in the wings is a proposed legislative plan for what they call an independent commission. It's a proposed constitutional amendment, which means that their idea is not subject to a gubernatorial veto or court challenge. And in this case, the legislature would choose the panel members. The criteria look similar to those proposed by the Fair Districts Bill, but there's a special wrinkle. You have to have a 75% approval by the panel members for any map to be approved by the commission. And the chances of that are happening are slim to none. And if they fail, the bill says, the constitutional amendment says, the legislature will draw the maps, and that will not be subject to review by the governor or the courts. The legislature would have full control to draw maps with no oversight. And that there's one final potential bombshell lying out there, and a very, very real one that involves a case now before the US Supreme Court based on a controversial concept called the independent state legislature theory. The appeal is from the North Carolina legislature, And it flows from a decision by the North Carolina Supreme Court that the legislature's congressional maps last cycle violated the North Carolina Constitution. And the legislature is appealing that ruling to the US Supreme Court on the basis of this independent state legislature theory. The Constitution delegates power to administer federal elections to the states, subject to congressional override. There is, however, a disagreement about how much power is delegated and to which state actors exactly. The traditional understanding has been, let's see if I can back up here. The traditional understanding has been that if a state constitution subjects legislation to being blocked by a governor's veto or a citizen referendum, election laws can be blocked by the same means. And state courts must ensure that laws for federal elections comply with their state constitutions. But if this went into place, we'd be in big trouble. And right now, it's looking very strongly as if this Supreme Court is likely to put this in place. And if they do, every independent commission in the United States would be abolished. Legislatures would have the power on their own to draw maps with no oversight by governors or by the courts. So that's what we're dealing with. So at this point, that's the end of my presentation, and I'd be more than happy to take questions. Jessica, if you've been monitoring the chat channel, maybe you could pass along some, and I'll see what I can do to answer them.
Yeah, let me double check here. Now is the time if anybody has any questions. I also wanted to pull up a couple questions that we received from our registration. But also, I was actually just curious. So if somebody wanted to get involved with Fair Districts PA on this side of the state, more close to Pittsburgh, is that a possibility, even though Fair Districts is mainly housed over in Harrisburg?
Fair Districts is statewide. We've got about 6,000 volunteers. And I have to say, our success in the age of COVID owes a huge amount to the arrival of Slack and Zoom. Because most of that, a good chunk of those talks we've given, like tonight, has been done by Zoom. And Slack has enabled us as a group to form committees and channels and work on a whole host of tasks. It's entirely a volunteer process. Our membership is made up of people with all sorts of skills, from marketing and communication to database management. If you are interested, we can find something for you to do. The best way is to go to fairdistrictspa.com, and you can go on the website and say, I'd like to be a volunteer, fill out a form, and we'll know where you're located, and we'll put your name and interest in touch with the people who are in charge. And we have a Southwestern Pennsylvania group. We have them all over the state. So you can get involved. And those individual regional groups also cooperate with each other on statewide campaigns. So Fix Harrisburg, there are talks being given all across the state by Zoom and in person by a speakers panel. And we all are using talks pretty much like this one.
Excellent. Okay. So we did get this question before in our registration. Do you have any words of encouragement for citizens who feel that their vote doesn't matter?
Well, to a certain extent, I have to admit that their concern is very valid, because we still have a state which is heavily gerrymandered. There's a huge number of districts, both Senate and House in Pennsylvania, where there's nobody running in opposition in the election. If you go to the ballot box, many of you are going to walk into that booth and you're going to discover I only got one candidate to vote for, because they're so heavily entrenched in that district. It doesn't matter what you think, they're going to win the election, and no candidate will run against them because it's fruitless. So the problem is, I often refer to this whole process as a form of Chinese water torture. We're dripping on a rock. This is not going to happen overnight. We've been at this 6 years. 6 years ago, legislators would tell us, I didn't know any candidate, any constituent who knew anything about gerrymandering. Now it's all over the place. And legislators who understand and support our cause tell us, at least behind closed doors, keep it up, it's important. So we are making progress. And we do take heart in the fact that the districts that were drawn this time around were much fairer. They're not pure, probably never will be, but they are much fairer. Now, you remember the congressional elections maps that were thrown out in 2018 due to a state Supreme Court challenge. Before that happened, Pennsylvania had an 18-member congressional delegation. Pennsylvania's statewide vote for governor and senator year after year would run within 2 or 3 percentage points either side at 50%. And yet our state congressional delegation was 13 Republican and 5 Democrats. When the court came in and said, this is a violation, and finally drew its own maps, the end result was 9-9. So it's a much fairer process. And again, the decision of analysts is that this new set of maps, both legislative and congressional, is much fairer. It still leans slightly Republican, but it's much fairer than it has been in the past. But as I said, the problem is, if we don't change things, we could go right back to the old system very easily, if even that system survives, because there's a lot of bombshells out there between the legislature's own plan and this unified legislative theory, which is just a disaster. So can we do it? Yes, we can. I don't think I'm not saying this with a sense of hubris. I can't think of another group in Pennsylvania that's been as effective in spreading the word about this important issue as Fair Districts. In fact, a lot of groups that are pursuing individual causes come to us and say, how do you do it? Well, we just, we were lucky. We got a lot of good volunteers and we've hung together. We've got a lot of people who, I think it like the Butch Cassidy and Sundance movie where the two of them are up in the hills watching the posse come after them saying, who are those guys? We're not giving up. We're not going away. Now we recognize that the problem is fixing Harrisburg. So the problem is in January, one of the things we want to do, and in between the election in January, we're going to be hounding legislators with the message, don't give away your power to represent us. Will we succeed? No. I'll be that blunt. But it's going to put the pressure on, it's going to raise visibility. And over the next 2 years, we'll be right back at them, hounding them over and over again. You gave your power away. Here are all these issues you're ignoring. You can't represent us, and it's got to change. And we need enough people to get involved, because a democracy will only survive if the citizens stand up and demand what they believe is right. If you just say, nobody can fix Harrisburg, I'm just not even voting anymore, you've essentially given up the fight and you've given the victory to the people who want to hold the power to do whatever they want without public interference.
All right. Here's another maybe big question. How can we change politics in all 3 branches of government to meet more often in the middle?
The biggest problem in Pennsylvania and in many states is gerrymandering. Because gerrymandering, when you get a primary for a state representative, if you got a Republican primary for a state representative, I can guarantee you that the candidate who goes as far right as possible is the one who's going to win. And pretty much the same thing for the Democrats on their side. And what you wind up with once the elections get down to the actual candidates for the office is you got 2 people who are like this. One of them's going to win, one's going to lose, but there's 203 legislators and a lot of them are far apart, and it just festers the climate for partisanship, for getting revenge. One of the things that's been proposed, and I think is worth an examination, is ranked choice voting. That was tried in Alaska, and I think it's been done in some parts of California. And basically, when you go into the booth, you say, I want to vote for Joe, but you'll be required to vote for your second choice candidate. So if when they start counting the votes, Joe's at the bottom of the list in terms of votes, he gets scrubbed off. And then they start looking at second choice among all the voters. And what that does is it reduces, the candidates have to play more toward the middle in terms of their stances. So that's seen as another way to possibly help reduce this. And, unfortunately, we live in a climate of social media that is just, it's a cesspool of this kind of stuff with messaging. I mean, whatever your stance, if I watch what's happening in Pennsylvania right now with the election, we're seeing messaging that's essentially Willie Horton on steroids. It has nothing to do with the real issues facing Pennsylvania because they know it works. And signs are that it's working. But you're never going to get people to address real issues when, memes like that help them stay in power.
I'm glad you mentioned the ranked choice voting, because we did have a question about how that could be implemented in Pennsylvania and nationally. And it sounds like it almost needs to be tried out in states and then gain popularity. And there, perhaps we could get to a point someday, I don't know, of nationally ranked choice voting.
Well, as I say, it has been implemented in some states. Alaska did it. In fact, Sarah Palin's election was impacted by that. There's a runoff, but people think possibly that the person who beat her, a native Alaskan, may hold on and keep the seat. But that was an area where they had to be brought a little closer together. I think they've done it in California. I'd have to look and see what other states have done it, but it's starting to get attention. And I believe there is a bill filed in the legislature. It would have to be refiled at the start of the new session in January, but it'll probably be there. And if that comes up, tell your legislator you support it. They probably won't, but you tell them they should.
Okay. Let's see, we did have a question about why legislators have been reluctant to change the rules. Is it true that leadership roles are based on who can raise the most? And I think the video clips that you shared were a great
But there's another thing to remember here. There are not a few legislators who understand this system is corrupt and that they can't represent their constituents. But you don't see them standing up. And the reason is why is they are subject to retribution from leadership if they try and buck the leaders. I tell the story of Jim Brewster, as a senator from the Allegheny County area. Jim has been a long fan of getting rid of per diems for legislators. That wasn't real popular with other legislators. And in the last redistricting cycle, I tried to put Jim's district into Poconos. And the leaders have all sorts of other little fun tools they can use by giving you lousy staff aides, lousy office locations, not giving you money for your campaign, giving you lousy committee assignments. So you buck them at your peril. You remember I mentioned that there has never been a successful discharge petition ever exercised in our legislature in modern times. And that's one of the reasons why it happens. There's an iron rule, and the leaders will not give it up.
I do know that you had touched on the importance of contacting members of legislature, and I believe we did put in the chat some helpful links, but is there anything else you want to add to the best way to kind of like get a hold of members of legislature? Do all of them have Twitter accounts and we need to just like bombard them on social media? What do you find is like the most effective way? Are phone calls like tried and true? What do you think?
I'd say all of the above, but I also am realistic. I remember hearing a well-respected and very prominent Democratic legislator say, you got to understand, I get 40,000 emails a month. There's no way possibly I can read them. At best, my staff tries to go through them and get a sense of where public opinion lies. We dealt with a bill, I think I mentioned the judicial voting districts bill, which the legislature is trying to pass through as a constitutional amendment. It was this absolutely horrible bill. And we mustered a coalition between fair districts and the Pennsylvania Bar Association, unions, the NAACP, a whole coalition of people who bombarded offices and told them, this is a bad idea, don't vote for it. It got out of committee, but not with a full vote from Republicans. And it's been sitting ever since, but they could try and bring it up again. So that's like quick mobilization. So you can write letters, you can email, they usually have their own site and you can go on there and leave a message. Again, you have to be honest and recognize that they do get huge amounts of contacts from their constituents, and you're just one of them, but working together with coalitions to make sure that they get a lot of messages saying, we want fair rules, begins to focus their attention. And stressing to them that you want to know where they stand. So again, if you go to our Know Before You Vote page on the Fair District's website, you'll find you can click on the district number. If you know what it is, you should be able to figure out which district you're in. You should see the name of the candidates, whether they're incumbents or newbies. And there should be at least some form of information on how to get a hold of them. And then if they're an incumbent, you can go to their legislative website and find the information to reach them there. And a letter never hurts either.
Awesome. Britton just shared that link in the chat again. We're going to make sure in the follow-up email to share resources that Doug touched on, and definitely, you know, keep everybody in the loop for different ways to learn more about Fair Districts PA and also just about this topic. I don't think I see any other Q&As. Look at it one more second, but I just want to thank you, Doug, for sharing all this great info. This is definitely something that we need to work on as a state. Not let up, keep voting, stay off social media.
Well, I have to
volunteer.
say, yeah, I have to say, I'm almost 80 years old, and I've been through a lot. I worked as an aide to Senator Ribicoff years ago in the U.S. Senate. I've been involved in politics my whole life, and I have never been as frightened as I am now for our democracy. So it absolutely demands that each and every one of us get out there, vote, talk to your friends and neighbors, get them involved, because if you sit and don't vote, if you sit and don't tell your legislators what you want to have, we are about to give away our democracy to forces that will be absolutely cataclysmic to our democracy. So that's serious.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today for this program. We hope you took away some actionable steps to help affect change in our future elections.
May I
Doug,
also
thank you.
say, Jessica, if people want to read,
Absolutely.
let me just put my email in the chat.
Thank you.
If anybody wants to, let me sort of find the chat here. If anybody wants to reach me, just send me a note, and I will try my best to get back.
Excellent.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, that's 823. Sorry, make that 823. My fingers are getting
DWeb823.
DWeb823
There we go.
AOL.com.
Excellent.
There we go.
All right. Thank you so much, Doug. Thanks to the Pittsburgh Foundation for supporting the work of Civics CLP through generous funding. Thank you all so much. Have a great rest of your evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Doug.